Well, it feels like it's been a marathon this season, but I can say with a great amount of pleasure and a little bit of uncertainty, if we're being honest, that there is one round to go here in the Hungry Jacks NBL. Welcome to Moments That Matter. It is your Monday debrief of everything that's gone on from across the weekend. I'm Jack Heron. Derek Rucker was just so enthralled by what he saw in Sydney yesterday that he's decided to stay over and have a little Monday morning in the Harbour City. D-Ruck, welcome to you.
Good morning, Jack. And man, we're getting through the episodes at Moments That Matter, and every episode brings us and plenty of thrills.
Well, let's start with the Red Army. I think they deserve to be first up in the billing on this show today because Perth had two big wins on the weekend. It was potentially a really tricky fixture for them round 19, but a win against South East Melbourne at home in a tough one on Friday, and then they were just too good for Sydney yesterday.
Well, let's start with the Friday night game because they didn't look good for three quarters at all. And I thought Southeast Melbourne were clearly the better team. In fact, one could make the case that they are a better team, but they didn't get it done in the fourth quarter. Bryce Cotton took over, exploded, electrified that Red Army out there. And I think that was the impetus for them to come over to Sydney and get a comprehensive victory, a victory in which they had the lead for 40 minutes of that ball game. And I just don't know what happened with Sydney, but the focus is on Perth, and they got it done when they needed it most. You know, they were another team that had two really disappointing home losses, and we all were kind of looking at Perth all of a sudden a little bit side-eyed. Bryce was a little bit down for those two games, but they've come back strong now, and John really has them playing at a solid level. They're not great, but they're really good. And I think they understand who they are now. They've got their full complement of players back also. And I thought that was a real key to pay attention to in this final round and then into the postseason.
Your point about Friday's a good one. So they go to Sydney on Sunday. They could have been forgiven for coming out a little bit flat, the travel factor as well after a big game on Friday. It seemed as though, Derek, watching, and we were getting ready for the second game, but it seemed as though they made a bit of an emphasis on starting really well because they kind of had things under control after quarter number one.
They did, and the question was posed during the game, would we rather be Sydney with 9 days off or Perth having to make the cross-country travel? And I think Brad Rosen and I both concurred that we'd rather be Perth. You've just played. You're kind of hardened with the battle. And you don't have to find your rhythm because, you know, you've been on the game court as opposed to the practice court. You know what it takes, and I think it was exemplified best. They look sharper. Sydney looked a little bit rusty, and I thought Perth, like you said, they jumped them early. Defense was solid. Perth hasn't been very good defensively this year, but Jack, over the past few rounds, they're starting to climb up the defensive rating to where I believe they're now 6th or 5th and in a really admirable position defensively.
Let's talk Bryce. Had another 30-piece yesterday. I know there's been a lot of conversation about the MVP, Derek, and how that all looks. I feel like I'm going to be Kanye West at an awards ceremony here. Like, as great as Kendrick's season has been, Bryce is the MVP. We can stop this talk now, can't we?
I think Friday night was the clincher. That fourth quarter he put on, coupled with Kendrick's subpar performance in that loss against Brisbane, I think that was the clincher. And yesterday after the game in Sydney, I had some female members of the Red Army respectfully accost me post-game asking me who was the MVP and who is really number one in Derek Rucker's top 15. Now, Jack, you know I'm working on the final edition of that. But not only did these females present their cases very well, but they furthered it up with some DM stats throughout the season, which, you know, it just shows you the impact that this guy, Bryce Cotton, has on this country and specifically Perth, Australia. He is a marvel. And I've said that, Jack, I'm getting sick of saying it, man. I'm getting sick because I sound redundant. But he keeps getting the job done. And it's you got to watch it, man. When it comes to your town, get a ticket. I don't care if you have never seen an NBL game in person. Go out there and get yourself a ticket because it's really something to behold.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's box office. Sell an organ if you have to. Do whatever you need to do to get the tickets to be able to go and watch Bryce Cotton play.
And yeah, we don't, again, we try and be fresh and come up with, you know, innovative concepts on this show and talk about things that are on the edge. But this guy continues to be reliable, entertaining, and progressive in the way he plays the game. He finds new ways to be successful. And I thought against Sydney, you know, he was just so instrumental. He's clearly the best player on the court. And this is a game in which you had Xavier Cooks and Jalen Adams playing against him, two of the top 10 players in the comp also.
Yeah, well, I think we've given Perth a lot of credit, and they've got one game against Adelaide on Friday, which they need to win. We'll talk about the play-in and the calculations shortly. But what about the Kings, Derek? As you say, they had 9 days off. They had no excuse to come out as flat as what they did. Alex Tui, tick. Kawat Noi, tick. What a season that he's had. But beyond that, they needed to be better yesterday.
It was just the effort, and you could feel that murmur throughout the crowd early on when they didn't bring the intensity, and Jalen Adams picked up his second foul. And, you know, Jalen's focus didn't look like it was there, and that happens from time to time. But it can't happen when it happened. That game was huge. That game was for third place, and the ramifications for their positioning, their seeding going into the postseason was heavily impacted by yesterday's performance. Now, I've mentioned Jalen Adams, but Xavier Cooks couldn't find his way against that Perth front line, who are long and athletic. And the way they play the game is with a lot of energy. And I thought Xav had one of his first down games in a long time. Cam Oliver did his best, but again, sometimes schematically, he was lost out there on the floor. But it was the effort stuff, and you can always bring effort. And I think that's where Kings coach Brian Goorjian would be devastated today. The fact that he couldn't get his guys to bring the intensity, especially on the defensive end, where that was the only way they were going to win this game, was by limiting Perth on the defensive end.
Staring down the barrel now, Sydney, of a 5v6 play-in eliminator against Adelaide. Probably, certainly it will be if they finish 6th at Kudos Bank Arena, but that's a tough one. Southeast Melbourne, on the other hand, we saw them yesterday. That game was pretty much put to bed at half-time. They led by 17 or 18, and then Adelaide came from the clouds in the third quarter, and it ended up being a nail-biter.
Well, Trez went nuts in that third quarter and dug Adelaide out of a deep hole. But look, the focus is on the Phoenix. They're a really good basketball team. And a couple of weeks ago, we had been highlighting the dangers of possibly facing the Adelaide 36ers in the postseason. Well, I think they've been replaced now as the danger team by the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. And Phoenix have a lot of ways to beat you. If they get Derek Walton Jr. back at any point in the postseason, that elevates their prospects of making a deep run. Sobey and Hurt are playing excellent basketball. Foxwell, now in the starting lineup, he was really good yesterday with 22 points. And you can just see, it's like minute by minute within a game, his confidence continues to grow. And the other one who is playing solid basketball, and you can see the pedigree that he has as a basketball player, is Joe Wieskamp. His contributions were essential yesterday. He didn't score a lot of points, but he played really sound basketball, and the type of basketball that helps you win games like yesterday.
Owen Foxwell was the footlocker player of the game. Is he at the point now where he's a starting prospect for Southeast Melbourne? I asked that with respect to Derek Walton Jr., who's their current import point guard. But if you're Southeast Melbourne, would you be considering Owen Foxwell as your starting point guard next year and maybe looking at an import too?
Without a doubt. If you are able to get a local point guard that can start, it adds so much flexibility to your ability to construct the team and what it does, not only for the building of the team, but also the salary cap ramifications, because that point guard position, as we've seen throughout the years, is a high value and a high expenditure position. So the ability to have Owen Foxwell in your lineup as a starter is tremendous. And you start shaping that team out and you look now, okay, well, guess what? Sobey actually seems like he plays well with Foxwell. It seems like there's a respect and a trust from Sobey towards Foxwell. Sobey's playing really well as Foxwell's game has been elevated. And then you're right. Maybe you go with a 2, but is that a good move considering you've got Sobey and Glover? I just don't see where you change that much with the Southeast Melbourne going forward into next season. You've got your coach. They look happy. They play hard. They're one of the best defensive teams in the competition. So maybe they just need a year with a little fine-tuning, but also just being together another off season and into the preseason, and this team will be, again, a lot better as a unit.
And just on Josh King, who you mentioned, this is not brand new information. This guy can seriously coach. Being in the venue yesterday, just seeing subtle little tweaks that he made. I mean, in the third quarter, Adelaide got hot, but in the fourth quarter, some small adjustments, some small changes that may have very well been the difference between winning and losing.
Jack, he's on. He's just on it all the time. And even when you talk with him pregame, you can see underneath, he's on it. He's thinking. And it takes that amount of desire and want to be great. And he has it. There's no mistaking the fact that he has totally 180 the fortunes of that franchise. And they have a guy, just like I said, that they have a guy now at the point in Owen Foxwell. Well, they have someone who is an astute coach. He knows his strategies. He has good instinct. And also he's a leader. And when you get all of those things wrapped up in one coach, again, Jack, you pay overs for that guy and you keep him around.
Righto, the Adelaide 36ers. We're at round 19. We're still none the wiser on this team, whether we trust them, whether we don't trust them. Friday night was a shocking loss. Let's call that for what it was in Brisbane. That's just one they should have banked and moved on. They had a really good third quarter yesterday against Southeast Melbourne, but a really average first half. I know there's a lot of people talking about Adelaide as being the danger team right now, but I mean, I'd offer another view, Derek, that based on what we saw Friday and based on what we saw in the first half on Sunday, it's hard to really think that Adelaide can play 4 quarters and win a play-in game.
Well, I think it goes back to the level of devotion to one another in that team. Are they bickering? Are they looking ahead? Are they looking at greener pastures? Or are they committed to doing what's required, like we saw them do over a patch twice throughout this season? Now, I guess if you look ahead to their potential first-round matchup, the Sydney Kings, that's the team that they feel confident against. And they feel like they can beat Sydney and Sydney if that's to be the case. But do I trust them as much as perhaps I had planned on trusting them 3 weeks ago? No, Jack. The play is too patchy. Isaac Humphries got himself into a bit of strife with fouls the other day. And, yeah, how do they bring it together? Wells doesn't look like he has the same confidence that he had a couple of weeks ago. This week, they've got to rally around each other and say, hey, we've only got a month left in this thing at the most. Let's make the most of it. We'll probably never be assembled together like this again. So let's ride it out, enjoy it, and try and have some fun and make some noise.
Saturday night at John Cain Arena, Melbourne back at home for the first time in quite a while against Tasmania. We should have known, Ruck. We should have known that when Melbourne and Tasmania play that it's going to be close. It was another single-figure margin. Melbourne United had to win, and they did.
Yeah, and they got just enough. And Shaylee came up big, making plays down the stretch. And Tasmania, crazy enough, Jack, if they would have won that game, they could have been in a position to knock Adelaide back out of the 6th. But they just faltered at the end. Some plays didn't go their way. I'm sure Jordan Crawford's feeling a bit unwell about, some of the stuff that, some of the plays he didn't make down the stretch, but that's basketball. And Melbourne United get an unconvincing victory. But as long as they finish second, they're well positioned to make a run and get back to the championship series. Do I like this Melbourne United team as much as last season's team? I do not. But given the nature of this league, Illawarra is vulnerable. I think there's more vulnerability throughout the top 6 than we saw last season. I think teams were more solidified in their style of play and their ability to play at a high level last season than we're seeing this season. But this season is unpredictably wonderful.
Did it? That's actually a really good phrase for it. Unpredictably wonderful. That might be the marketing slogan for next NBL season. You can claim some royalties on that. Jack White had a back issue for Saturday night. Minutes were a little bit restricted. Impact was a little bit restricted. But does that show us how important Jack White is for that team? Because they very nearly lost that game.
Yeah, he's going to be a key. I think he has to be their second best player consistently from here until the championship series, should they qualify. I think Chris Golding is their most important player, but at times Jack needs to be the best player on the floor for Melbourne United to go deep. And that's just the way it is. When you're brought over here from the NBA, from the G League, and the positions that Jack has been in, you have to accept that responsibility and be ready to raise your level up. Now, we know he has it, and unfortunately for him, this is kind of his second or third complaint throughout the course of the season that has started to limit his availability. So, here's hoping that he can get himself right, because I just don't see Melbourne United being able to win a championship if he's not fully capable.
Last one on United. We've spent the morning playing with the ladder predictor, of course. NBL.com.au is where you find it. High likelihood that if they are successful, I should say, against South East Melbourne on Saturday night, they finish second. To your eye, are they the second best team in the competition?
Wow. So you've got Melbourne United, South East Melbourne, and Perth. I've got those three in a bowl together, and I don't know who's better out of the three, Jack. Southeast Melbourne have kind of owned Melbourne this season. I think they're 2-0 against them going into the throwdown this Saturday night. Melbourne United went over to Perth and beat Perth. Southeast Melbourne went over to Perth, played well, and Perth beat them. Who's better out of the three? I don't know. I don't know.
I might give you an easier question. We flirted with this last week around the JackJumpers because there was still the slight chance that if they beat Melbourne, they could finish sixth. Now they won't. Now the run is officially over. And in the course of 3 seasons to have gone grand final series, semi-final series, champions, Scott Roth will forever be linked to the success of the JackJumpers and everything that he's done for Tasmanian basketball. But I think now we can officially say that this run with this current roster is over.
I think so. Now, they could run it back with these guys. I think that's too much risk. And you're also hoping that Will Magnay comes back at full strength and can stay healthy. If you had all those pieces back and were willing to play with a little bit of risk and wanted one final swan song, maybe I could come to dance to that music. But I'm probably making some changes. I got to look at the imports. They've both been really patchy. Milton Doyle in particular has been extremely inefficient. They score points, but is it good enough now after having that championship run? And sometimes the holiday comes to an end and it's time to make a change. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. We hear a lot of rumors about Scott Roth's movements. Perhaps, he wants to go on and challenge himself in a different coaching situation. Who knows? That would be a shame because he's such a brilliant coach. And I think he is exceptional for our league. But they've got some hard decisions to make. And I'm sure emotion is really strong down there. And there'll be some attachments to those imports who help bring you a championship. It's very hard, but this is a way you've got to continue to find improvement and progress, and tough decisions will be made.
A couple of shout-outs for teams who can't make the play-in series but still manage to find a way to get the motivation to record victories. Brisbane on Friday night, great win over Adelaide, and New Zealand over Cairns on Saturday. Matt Mooney, the star of that game with 24 points, has spoken about an interest in coming back next season, which is great for New Zealand.
Yeah, well, if he wants to come back to New Zealand, I think that's something that they should get done pretty quickly. I think there are a couple of other teams that could use a guy like Matt Mooney throughout the NBL, but the Brisbane win was the one that I thought was a significant achievement for the Bullets, kind of closing out the season. But we talked about Bryce Cotton solidifying his MVP award. I think now Casey Prather has made a very, very strong case for first team All-NBL. Yeah. I believe he is worthy, that he's played well enough to be one of the top 5 players in the competition. So it wouldn't shock me at all if Casey's first team all NBL in about 10 days.
Well, this could be a fun little exercise. Cotton, Kendrick, Prather,
Hurt. Oof.
Who's the fifth?
The fifth is a tough one. I'm looking around and I think I'm probably going to go with Trey Kell the third.
It feels like either Trey Kell or probably Montrezl Harrell, doesn't it?
Or Montrez. I'll probably have to do a deep dive over the next few days. And actually, those MVP awards at Gazy's are a week from today, actually, Jack. So we'll know in a week.
They are. They're very excited for that one. I know you've got your suit all organised. I know you're going to be looking spiffy.
I'll be trying my best.
Hey, let's finish up with thumbs up, thumbs down. Start with the good. Who's getting you thumbs up this week?
I'm going to go with the Perth Wildcats. I just thought what they did was outstanding, and so much is made often of the travel and how difficult it is, and I thought they handled it really well. They got over to Sydney on Saturday afternoon, kind of had a relaxed afternoon, and got themselves ready to play basketball. And I think John really receives a lot of criticism for his demeanor, his excessive and expressive emotions during the games. But he's been quite successful out there in Perth, and they are steadied now to make a nice run at it, Jack.
I agree with that. They're pretty well placed right now. My thumbs up is to Joe Wieskamp. You mentioned him earlier on. Came up with two enormous plays back-to-back to help South East Melbourne to victory. The block at one end and then the layup at the other end to finish off the game. I think it's more of a thumbs up for his season, Derek. It was pretty shaky at the start. Now you look at his numbers, and certainly his numbers over the last 8 games, they're better than solid. He's become a really important contributor for this team.
Well, we love to see it, right? A guy who sticks with it, and from Southeast Melbourne's perspective, front office perspective, seeing the vision and understanding that if we stay with him and he continues to work hard and we get the right coach in here, that he can help us win games. I've always liked him, even when he was struggling. So it's always good to see players find their form and enjoy their time here in the NBL.
Shout out to you, Joe. Well done. Thumbs down?
Thumbs down. I'm going to go with the Cairns Taipans and the New Zealand Breakers. I know it wasn't an important game, but I kind of hate to see when imports leave early.
Yeah.
And I think I get it from a professional perspective. Rob Edwards is going to his next place. Parker Jackson Cartwright is going to his next place. I get it, but it doesn't sit well with me, because the fans and the people, they've put so much of their energy and their money to make the season work, and to kind of see players bounce out early on their franchises it doesn't feel good to me, Jack.
Funnily enough, I had the exact same thing written down. It's a shame. I understand the business side of things, but maybe there's the old school part of me as well that would like to see them at least finish out the season and then go on to what's next after that. So I have to go in a different direction now. I think I've got to give my thumbs down to the Adelaide 36ers. I'm not saying that their season's done. They're going to make the play-in. But I just wonder, Derek, for the cattle that they have got on this roster, they might win a play-in, they might win 2 play-in games. But I just think there's going to be a point where they are all going to sit down at one point and kick themselves that they haven't been able to get more out of this season.
Yeah, and the word is regret. If they look around, say they drop the first play-in game, they're sitting around in the change room looking at each other, and you don't want to be in a position of regret, thinking, what if we had done this? What if we had been a little bit more dedicated to what we're trying to do? Not to say that they're not dedicated, but this week's preparation, if I was Mike Wells, I'm just looking at the mental side of it and trying to get these guys fresh mentally, locked into what they need to do. How are they going to beat the Perth Wildcats over there? Physically, we know they're more than capable, but we've got to free their mind up, stimulate them mentally so they're willing to come out, stick to the game plan, play with a lot of energy, and not go through lapses within games that cost them 6, 7, 8 points over a 2-minute stretch. Instead, let's be the ones on the front foot. Let's dominate tempo. Let's dominate play. Understand what we got to do on the defensive end and get it done. Because, like I said, we know the potential there. But I just think it starts with their mindset.
I agree with all of that, but I guess they have to be willing to want to do it as players as well, don't they?
Well, and it's the leadership right now, and they've got to come together and look at each other hard and be like, we went 0-2 this weekend and 2 games that technically, well, Brisbane, you definitely should have won the game. And then Southeast Melbourne, you fought your way from 20 down in the second half to have a chance to win it. So, you don't want to face regret.
Final round starts on Wednesday. When we get back together this time next Monday, we'll know what the play-in looks like. We'll know who's playing, we'll know where they're playing, and we'll be able to break it all down for you on Moments That Matter. Derek, have a great week.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks to everyone out there for continuing to watch Moments That Matter. We love doing it, and hopefully you get some entertainment and insight out of it.
Hopefully, a little bit of both. And if you're at a loose end, NBL.com.au, have a play around with the ladder predictor and spend as much time on it as we have. Have a great week. We'll catch you next week.